Hello everyone, I hope you're doing great. In my previous video, I talked about how to make a custom undergraver filter stream tank. In this video, I will compare three different types of stream tank setup that I'm currently using for many years now. I will talk about their pros and cons of each setup and why I'm using it. Before I begin, I would like to let you know that this is my own personal experience. Each breeder has different type of setup that they prefer. So you might have your own setup and your own opinion about it, and your result might be completely different from mine, which is fine. This is the fun part of this hobby. But at the end of the day, what it matters is how to keep the shrimps happy, alive, and breed constantly. You certainly don't want to see them die of what you have invested and spend time on them. So let's start with the first type of setup is using a thin layer. This is a very simple and economical way to set up a shrimp tank. All you need is a thin layer aqua soy, enough to cover the bottom tank. And as for filter, just simply use a double sponge filter and that's it. Alright, so let's talk about the advantages of this setup. First, it's easy to maintain and to clean underneath the bottom tank. Secondly, it's fast and easy to replace the soil when it no longer buffers the pH properly. Third, it's a cheaper way. Let's say that you have many tanks, about 50 or 100 tanks for example, and you don't want to waste too much soil on each tank. So it's a good way to save your soil and only use a thin layer instead of a thick layer. And lastly, it works well in short and mid-term use only. Now we know the advantages of this setup. What about the cons of this setup? Firstly, you need to verify more often your pH to make sure it's still buffering, stable enough, and if you forget to do it and you don't have enough time to take care, the pH will fluctuate and you will notice some of your shrimp start to die suddenly, and most of the time you don't know why they die. Secondly, you need to replace the soil every 6 or 7 months, depending the thickness of layer you put in. This is my case. I just want to share my experience with you guys. And let's say that you have many tanks, for example, more than 10 or 20 or 50 tanks, for example. And you also have a full-time job, a family, and kids to take care. It could be a hassle for you who doesn't have much time to maintain all the shrimp tanks. So just keep in mind the pros and the cons of this setup and also your situation. Maybe this thin layer is not for you. The second type of shrimp tank setup is using a separate glass cut. You measure the distance and silicone it yourself. Obviously, it's involved more work. There are two ways to do this method. The first way, you separate the bottom tank with an undergraver filter blade. You can add bio balls and volcano rocks at the first layer, then followed by a white foam to separate, and finally you add some soil in the third layer. A second way, you simply add bio balls on undergraver filter blade and then put the aqua soil on the top, but you need to spend more soil to cover the whole surface, of course. Let's talk about the advantages of this setup. It works well in long-term use since the amount of soil used is bigger. Some of my shrimp tanks using this method have been running for 3 to 4 years without changing new soil, and the pH is still stable around 6.2 to 6.4. And I have to admit my shrimp are still very active and they are still breeding normally fine. Now, second advantage of using undergraver filter is easy to maintain. They don't require frequent cleaning or replacement of filter media. And if you are a busy person like myself and you don't have enough time to clean, this setup fits for you. Also, undergraver filter use biobowls, volcano rocks, which allow beneficial bacteria to live inside and to break down organic waste and to keep the water clean. And then the soil on top used to buffer the pH and keep very stable and consistent water environment. It's a great setup if you want to keep Caridina shrimp. And the last advantage, using undergraver filter is less expensive than other type of filter, and it could fit in any variety of tank size. Let's talk about some disadvantages of this setup. It's hard to clean underneath the undergraver filter plate. If you don't drill a hole, it could be a mess. Just keep in mind, with time, the dirt could accumulate at the bottom, which will reduce the performance of your undergraver filter. Secondly, not everyone likes to drill a hole at the bottom of their tank, and not everyone likes to separate in the back with a silicone glass cut. The third and last type of shrimp setup is using an undergraver filter inside a transparent acrylic box. It works pretty much the same as the second type of setup, but there are a few things that stand out of this setup which I consider excellent advantages. Easy to remove the undergraver filter box in case the soil doesn't buffer the pH anymore, which means it has reached to the end of a lifespan. Therefore, it needs to be changed. Secondly, the undergraver filter box doesn't take much space. Yes, it takes a little bit space, but not that much. And you don't need to silicone the glass compared to the second setup. You don't need to drill a hole underneath your tank in order to remove all the dirt out. It's easy to clean, to maintain, and to replace by another undergraver filter box with the same setup. All you need is to prepare in advance your replacement box with all the materials and soil. Obviously, it must be already recycled. Now we know the main advantage of this UGF box. Does it have any disadvantage or any flaws? Here are some disadvantages. First thing first, it's hard to find an acrylic box that will fit in the UGF blade, especially if you live in the North America, for example, Canada or US. Speaking for myself, it took me a few weeks to do some research and measures before I can able to find the right box that could fit in. I was lucky enough to find some in Amazon. Then I also need to cut the borders in order to make sure it could fit in. I have to admit it's a bit hassle, but it's worth for every single penny and time that I spend on. The second option is you can build yourself, DIY, a custom box by cutting glass and then glue together with a silicone. But again, it's time consuming, and not everyone like DIY and to find the right materials and using their hands to build. I hope these three types of shrimp setup will help you to understand and to get a better idea of what they can do, especially for those of you who just started as a beginner. And I'm sure some of you feel very confused or maybe intimidated while seeing this type of setup at first. But let me tell you something, when I first started this hobby, just like everyone else, I used the classic thick layer method to keep shrimps. But after years later, I had many issues with it. For example, I used to overfeed and I didn't do much water change, and the bottom soil got really dirty and there were planaria and other worms start to appear inside my tank. But at that time, I think they are benefits for the shrimp, for the tanks. And believe me, I was not forced to give up this hobby and moved on to other things in life. But I did not give up that easy. So I did some study and research. It took me some time to understand how they were those concepts of shrimp setup before switching to other type of setup. Maybe if you just started, you better stay with the standard thick layer setup. Try to learn more before thinking to change. And for some of you who already know, these types of setup are nothing new. But can you tell me which one is your current choice? Once again, thank you for everyone who liked and subscribed to my last videos. I really appreciate it. Until then, I'll see you next time. Have a nice day.